To build a foundation of trust, where do you need to start? In a world that seems to be increasingly individualistic, how can we foster deeper connections and build genuine trust with one another? And how does the act of trusting influence our perception of self and others? I am Nuala, and I'm here with Karen. Together, we are the Safety Collaborators.
Our mission is to help people have better conversations and change the way they think about safety. So today we continue with our Conversational Intelligence series. And today's particular episode is going to focus on how do we build trust. So what is it? So I'm going to also do a little reminder here about what is conversational intelligence. It is the hardwired and learnable ability to connect, navigate and grow with others, a necessity in building healthier and more resilient organisations in the face of change. CIQ begins with trust and ends with a high-quality relationship and business success, by the late Judith E. Glaser. What we've already covered in previous episodes is in episode 38, we actually introduced you to what is conversational intelligence and the learn activity. So we thought we'd give you something to play with right up front. In episode 39, we talk about the conversational intelligence essentials, of which there are 5, and priming for trust is one of them. And episode 40, we go into the 3 levels of conversation, which are transactional, positional, and transformational. So go back and have a listen to them if you haven't already.
Let's dive into today. So the trust model provides a framework for building trust in our conversations and relationships. And we've said this so many times that everything starts with a conversation, and all meaningful conversations and connections are built on trust. And what I think we don't often realize is that trust can be cultivated through intentional communication. We can be very aware of where we're at and how we're going into a conversation before we even start, and then say, right, how am I building for trust in this interaction I'm going into with somebody else? And you mentioned episode 39, where we looked at the 5 conversational intelligence essentials. And the first of those is priming for trust. And there's a beautiful trust model in that. So Karen, remind us, what is that model?
I think what's important to put some people who have probably potentially listening who have worked with trust models over the years, the trust model that we're specifically talking about today is the one that we have within the conversational intelligence framework. So we call it the CIQ trust model. And T, we love an acronym as well. So T stands for transparency. So that is about how do we quell the threats? How do we stop threats and fears from happening? How can we create a safe environment? So transparency helps us to do that. The R stands for relationship. So how do we listen to connect, which by the way is another one of those CIQ essentials. How do we establish rapport? The U stands for understanding. How do we listen to understand? Listen, not just to our own personal listening, but also to the person in front of us. So how can we step into the other person's reality? We often in this world talk about stepping under or into underneath another person's umbrella. If you think about the metaphor of an umbrella, how can we stand underneath an umbrella together and truly listen to each other? The S stands for shared success. So when we're listening, you'll notice that the listening is a very important component of trust. How do we listen to co-create those strategies or our end game for mutual success? So how do we paint a picture of shared success? And the 5th letter, of course, is testing assumptions or truth-telling. So how do we listen to close the reality gap? I have my reality, you have yours. How do we close that gap so that we can have healthy, truth-telling conversations with candor and care? And when we talk about cultures of care And we often talk about words create worlds, if you like. This are really, really important. So that CIQ trust model is transparency, relationship, understanding, shared success, testing assumptions or truth-telling. And each of these elements is essential for building a foundation of trust.
Let's imagine that you're having a conversation with someone you've just met. And how do you build a foundation of trust from the very first moment? If you think about where does trust actually start, it starts in the moment of contact. There's so many things around, you just walk past somebody and you decide whether you like them or don't like them, or trust them or don't trust them. It is that quick. It is so fast that our brains are just doing it without us even realizing we're processing it. And we can have uncertainty in that moment of contact where we're kind of going, well, what's happening here? Do we go into defensive patterns? So we pivot between distrust and trust, and there may be many things that add to that. So it could be things like groupthink or addicted to being right, the status quo of where we're at. Do I want to have power over this person that I'm having a conversation with? Do I feel I need to protect my turf? Or am I open to putting all of that aside and reduce the defensive pattern and have a trusting conversation instead? And when we were looking into this and going through it, there were, some amazing things that we found out about, just how fast or slow this actually happens. And I can see you have a thought running through your head.
I do. And I'm thinking about, so here we're talking about it's like it's all very cognitive, but it's really about the whole body. So, when you just said, it's in that moment of contact, our brain's doing whatever our brain's doing. But I'm guessing that most people will feel it first. You might say, oh, my instincts are telling me to be, oh, he looks a bit dodgy over there, or, I'm not sure I trust that person. There's going to be that sort of uncertainty that's actually coming not just cognitively, but actually through the body. So our emotions and our emotional hormones are very important here as well. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We are very energetic beings. Our brains are incredible. We do a lot of connecting through these energy waves that we don't even see, and that may sound a little woofy to some people, but that's okay. It is a bit of a reality. You started to tap into this, what is our brain like when we're in that state of uncertainty, and those defensive patterns kick in, whatever they might be.
No, absolutely. It might be helpful for people to understand, well, just how fast or slow does this actually take place? What's happening in the brain?
I think it's fascinating.
It is.
We'll actually put a little image in here so that you can see this when you look at the show notes. I sort of interrupted a little bit there in your flow, but, if we think of time, slow versus fast, Sunula's just said we can be really surprised at the speed of this. Even the slow is still pretty fast. Right?
Fast.
So if we think of the slow time we're talking about, so this is that point of contact. Do you want to do the slow ones? I'll do the fast ones.
Alrighty. So at the moment of contact, in 0.1 of a second, judgments are made. In 1 second, we've made conclusions about the person that we have just interacted with. In 10 seconds, we have made decisions. And in 12 to 18 seconds, our listening goes inward. We start listening to our own thoughts and our own what's going on in our head, and we stop listening to the person in front of us. So we forget about that listening to connect because we've already judged, we've already concluded, and we've already made a decision.
Absolutely.
On where we're at. And that is at the moment of contact in slow time. I think what's even more astounding is what happens in fast time. So if 0.1 of a second is slow, what's fast?
And this is happening all concurrently, right? This is not in a linear progression. So we say that in 0.07 of a second, first impressions are made. In 0.07 of a second, trust is lost. And I think we've all heard that, we can lose trust that fast, and it takes a long time to build. This is how fast we actually lose it. And in 0.07 of a second, our voice is lost as well. So that's when we're going inwards. So then all those other slow elements take over. So that's how fast this all happens on the point of contact.
And we haven't even got to 30 seconds conversation yet.
No, exactly. So if we can change our conversations, they can change our life. But for us to be able to change conversations, we need to undergo a bit deeper and understand what conversation actually is. And trust is foundational to having healthy conversations. And that doesn't mean they're all nice and feel good. Not at all.
No.
It's actually about healthy conversations can be about dissent. It can be about challenging the system. It can be about disagreement, because they're actually healthy things, as well as the positive, feel-good conversations that build people up.
And co-creation.
Exactly. So we're still on this brain of uncertainty at the moment.
We are. And for me, what's really helpful is just that recognition of this is what happens and it's normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
We all do this.
It's part of being human.
But just because it's normal doesn't mean that we have to accept it. We don't have to buy into it and just go, oh, well, that's the way it is. And if I don't trust someone, I'm just not going to trust them in that, I'm going to walk away.
Agree.
We can challenge ourselves and go, oh, why do I think I'm not trusting in this moment of contact? Is it because this person reminds me of somebody that I've had a previous experience with? There's so many ways, but when we are competent and capable enough to question ourselves, we can start changing the conversations which will change our lives. And I can go, I'm not trusting you, but I want to make sure that that's not just, like my kind of instinct brain or animal brain kicking in.
And bias.
And
Yep.
I want to step into cognitive thought and go, right, let's try this again. Let me get to know you a little bit better. And it just reminded me of, I'll have to find who said this quote. I can't remember off at the moment. And it was something along the lines of, I really don't like that person. I'll have to get to know them better.
Oh, I remember you telling me this one. Actually, not that long ago.
But I cannot remember who said it. We'll find who said it. And for me, that just links so beautifully into this model is just because you don't like someone, don't accept that at face value. My challenge is to challenge you to say, let me get to know them a little bit better. And what happens when we don't get to know them a little bit better, when we sit in that uncertainty at the moment of contact? What are some of the things that can go wrong?
My imagery at the moment is a person sitting there in the meeting with their arms folded and leaning back in the chair. It's an indication that there's a lack of trust.
And being disengaged.
So when we're in this, it could be that there's some problems or challenges or there hasn't been an agreement somewhere along the way, so that you don't know how to navigate it. We've all have those moments where we know we might have to have that difficult conversation, for example, and we spend lots of time angsting over how to navigate that. But maybe that's because there isn't enough trust in the first place.
Yeah.
It's funny, psychological safety keeps popping up for me right through this conversation, all the way through this.
Yeah.
If we don't navigate those differences, then it's going to be very difficult to build trust. That's one way.
And if you think even when, let's say we're trying to co-create a solution or something's come up in the team and we feel like, oh, this is beyond my expertise. Do I have to fake it till I become it or fake it till I make it or something? And it creates fear and it creates uncertainty, because in that moment, if I don't trust that you will not judge me for saying, I don't know the best way to go forward in this situation, I will either back off and become disengaged, or I will, bring out bravado and addiction to being right and just try and find a solution that I feel, I can have power over in that moment. And it can really ripple out to blocking learning, to stopping innovation, because we don't have that trust amongst us to be able to say, hey, this is where we're at, and actually it's damn uncomfortable. What do we do with it?
It's interesting, and at this point in time, the conversational styles may tend to be quite transactional or positional, because we're trying to protect ourselves again, even through all of this,
And we can end up being quite defensive in those moments,
Very
in
much.
the group dynamics. What we were mentioning earlier about protecting my turf.
If you want to reach out to us, use the hashtag Conversations That Matter and we'll pick it up on the socials. Or look out for us on LinkedIn, Karen Ovari, me, Nuala Gage, or our company, Safety Collaborations. Now back to this week's show.
Needless to say, if we're living in this space of distrust, then we're going to be in a fairly stressful place. So if I'm in a situation where in an environment or within a team where I feel uncertainty and I'm going to use the words vulnerability is not being rewarded, because I might have made a mistake or because I've done something else, but I don't know why the word demonized came to mind, but maybe that's what it is, right? It's a bit hectic, but yeah. But, for some people, if it gets into such a stressful situation, then it could be. And the problem with that is when we're in a state of stress, so distrust and stress, it decreases our ability to be open to options and other opportunities. So it stops us from having those healthier conversations or those transformational conversations. We're not suggesting that every conversation has to be a transformational one, not at all. Sometimes transactional and
Positional or important.
very much so. But when we're under that stress, it stops us from opening up. It shuts down the ability to innovate. It limits our range of vision. It stops our prefrontal cortex from thinking because now our fast brain is kicking in. And this is different to time. So our fast brain tends to be our emotional brain. So all of this limbic region is now kicked in. And therefore it stops our newer brain, which is our prefrontal cortex or our executive brain, the one at the front of our head, to work properly. And this is quite important when we have these conversations around conversational intelligence.
It reminds me so much of a time when I was living in a very stressful, distrustful situation in a working environment. And it honestly broke me because I didn't feel that I was supported. I didn't feel that I could speak up and say when I was not comfortable with something or I was uncertain or I felt completely alone. But not only did I feel alone in that distrustful situation, but I also couldn't function. I actually could not function to my full capability, capacity. I felt like I'd lost 50% of my brain because I just would shut down when I was in that particular situation and working with that particular person, where it just became such a destructive working environment.
Yeah.
And there was no access to higher thinking or creativity. I was literally just trying to survive. And survival is not a good place to be in when you are wanting to add value, when you're wanting to contribute to your environment. And I can guarantee you that challenging in that kind of space, even when I felt that things were wrong and needed to be corrected,
You won't.
there were many times where I did not have the physical stamina or capacity to be able to do that.
I think I'll bring up that word vulnerability again at this point. We talk about cultures of care, and a starting position in cultures of care is how do we help people to feel okay when they're in a vulnerable space? How do we reward vulnerability? And that's really important here because of everything you just said. If we don't feel that we have enough trust in the environment and the people around us to speak up, we won't.
No, we won't.
And that will impact the bottom line, safety statistics, if you want to talk about those. It will impact friendships, working relationships, innovation. The list goes on. Let's not even go down diversity, inclusion, and all the other stuff. All right.
Yeah.
So trust is key. But trust is at an individual level as well. So it's about the individuals within the group.
Very much so. And I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it as well.
Oh my God. Year on year. Yeah.
Exactly. I will always go into something trying to trust first and prove me wrong. Whereas other people are the flip of that. They were like, you're going to have to prove to me that I can trust you, because my first position and my default position is I don't know you, I don't trust you. So build on that. And I often think how different would our world be if we could have that default position as I will trust first, because trust really does change reality. It changes the conversation.
It does. Simon Sinek said this some time ago. When it comes to leaders, we've got examples arms long on this. I mean, how many times have you heard it? No, they have to gain my trust before I'll do anything. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, what would happen if we started, following on from what you just said, started from a position of trust? So as leaders, we need to give trust to get trust. It's not the other way around. It isn't your right to be trusted. It just isn't. No. So how do leaders feel safe enough within themselves? I think that's what's important. And that's not just leaders, it's everybody, to be fair. I'm not demonising leadership here, and far from it. We love them. So how do we help people to feel safe enough within themselves to give trust first? That's tricky. You and I are both trusting people. We trust first. It's our default position. I'm the same.
Yes.
So much so it can be actually a bit detrimental, but yeah. Sometimes it might bite us. And so what? We learn from it. Mm-hmm. So what?
And we do learn from it, and it's not going to change the negative experiences that I've had where I've trusted someone and they've let me down. That's on them.
Yes, I think it is.
That's not on me.
No.
So I'm not going to change who I am because of those experiences. But it's helpful to understand, and as we were chatting, and I was actually even sharing my story a little while ago, I was thinking it's helpful to understand what is actually happening in our brains when we are in distrust versus when we are in trust. And why is it that we shut down and that we feel like this cloud is just kind of coming over us in distrust, yet in trust we almost feel like, you can hear the birds singing and the sunshine is coming
Euphoria, clouds and sunflowers.
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned the words trust changes reality. And we started with what happens at that first connect point, if you like, and what happens when the brain is in that state of distrust. But when we look at it, trust is in layers. If we look at it now from a more of a neuroscience perspective, 2 hormones in our system impact this greatly. So one is cortisol and the other is oxytocin. So that cortisol, so when we're operating from that place of distrust, that's when the very back part of our brain is in high flight, fear, fright, flight mode. Mm-hmm. And we tend to be quite nearsighted when we're like that. So we see the reality through threats and fear, and therefore we close down. So our line of sight, if you like, is really short, if you think about it that way. So we're operating from
very narrow,
high levels of cortisol, and please, we need cortisol for action. The right amount of cortisol in our system is very important. We couldn't function without it. So it's not about shutting and getting rid of cortisol, but it's when we have this amygdala flip, if you like, right? When we know that we're now operating from pure emotional instinct, if you wish. That's when it's too much, or if we're in that place of incredible high stress. You can't see
the wood for the trees.
Something like that. So the term that we use is downregulate and upregulate. So the thing is here is how do we downregulate our cortisol or our amygdala hijack so that we can open up our vision and open up our line of sight, if you wish. We do that through the other hormone, oxytocin. When we've got lots of doses of oxytocin going through our system, we then see reality more clearly. It opens us up and allows us to go through from nearsighted to long range and quite inclusive lenses, if you like. So that's when we say we have to downregulate cortisol and upregulate oxytocin. How do we do that? It could be a kind word from somebody. It could be a hug. Oxytocin is the hug hormone. So, going out into nature. Sometimes, when we're feeling a bit stressed, it could be taking 10 deep breaths. There are many, many tools that we can use, and not for this conversation here right now, that can help us to build or to downregulate cortisol and upregulate oxytocin. And the mix of those 2 hormones through our conversational and trust mindsets allows us then to either go from protect mode to open and to a we mode. How we listen is really important in that process. We'll talk more about listening in a future episode. What's interesting here, and Nils, please butt in, we can measure the levels of trust within an organization. We actually have some tools and we call them catalyst tools, where we could even have a look at measure a team's trust levels or a division or a whole organization. So if that's something that's of interest to you, or you know somebody that would be of interest to, reach out, email either Nuala or myself at safetycollaborations.com. You can use hello@safetycollaborations.com, and we can have a little conversation about, do you want to know how to change the trust reality in your organization?
When you understand that, and I wish I had known that when I was going through such a stressful situation. I wish I'd understood the neuroscience behind the experience that I was having, because then I would have been able to do something about better recovery. I might not have been able to fix the situation completely, but I could have managed my own kind of process, my own what was happening in my body and the effects that it was having, because it had full-on proper physical effects.
Hell yeah.
So when we know that, we can look at it. And what you were saying about measuring trust in organizations, it's more critical than we imagine. And it might be, helpful for people to think, well, during this conversation that we've had, what have you learned about trust that maybe you didn't know about before? And what does trust mean for you? And has that changed during this journey of exploring it a little bit further? And then take that to the next level. Well, how does trust look like in your team, and what does it mean in your team? And then to the next level, what does it mean to your company? And how important is it to develop, not only in yourself, but also in your company? And take time to reflect on those, because they are critical questions. And your responses to that will give you a really good indication as to what is the next step that would be helpful for you and your team to take in the journey of building better trust, changing your conversations, and changing your lives of yourself and those in your team. And there's a wonderful Dutch saying, trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback.
Yep.
So it's not just about that moment of contact, which is critical, and being conscious of, in that moment of contact, what is happening and how am I reacting, and how do I choose to use those reactions as emotional stop signs, and I can then make a choice as to what direction to turn. But it's also around when trust is broken in a longer term relationship, what do I do to not have them running out on horseback, but actually continuing the journey and having the right conversations that matter to create a healthier future.
Couldn't have said that better myself. And on that note, thank you for joining us today, and always lovely to have those conversations that matter. Our next episode, we'll actually be discussing in a little more detail the neuroscience of conversation, so listen out for that one. Feel free to connect with us on our website, safetycollaborations.com, where you will find all the show notes for this episode and all previous episodes, which is, the list is growing, we're happy to say. It's very exciting. And if you enjoyed this podcast and it's added some value to your life, please help us spread the word and follow us on your favourite podcast platform. Give it a 5-star review if you like. That would be awesome. And start sharing it with others as well. So till next week, stay safe and stay well.